Hi, my name is Plamen Arnodov, CTO of QA2.com, and today I'd like to show you our free extension for Adobe Launch called Aerialist. It lets you define hot areas on your website or web app, collect smart impressions and clicks, and measure engagement based on more accurate click-through rates. Some applications include tracking conversions below the fold of skyscraper landing pages, highly dynamic pages with complex navigation or single-page apps, as well as any personalized content or content on the website that is the result of a site search. Here's a typical use case. On our corporate homepage, we have this slideshow at the very top, and I'd like to know how many new visitors get to see each of these individual slides versus how many interact with the call to action buttons contained in each slide. As it turns out, that is a huge challenge for a lot of tag management solutions because all the slides are already in the viewport and they just fade in and out. I also want to know how many people scroll down and interact with calls to action further down. On our blog page, I'd like to attribute all these individual ways to interact with a featured blog post to that specific blog post. And I also want to know how many people scroll down and see these blog blurbs that vary over time, and they also vary if the user is already authenticated. Now, all of this is quite doable if you have a couple of days and some serious JavaScript coding skills, but I'd like to show you how easy it is to accomplish for someone who's not even a JavaScript programmer with the use of our Aerialist extension. Step 1, we're going to install the extension into a launch property. Step 2, we'll configure areas with the help of a wizard. And step 3, we'll set up rules for data collection. I just installed the extension from the catalog, and since there's nothing to configure at the top level, I'm going to go ahead and click over to rules. I'm going to create a new rule. I'll call it Aerialist load tracking. And from the events, I'm going to select a core event, and I'll pick page bottom because that way it will minimally impact the actual loading of the page for the end user. Inside actions, I'm going to select Aerialist from the extension dropdown, and the action type will be track areas, which will load the interface for the tracking logic. So here's where I configure the individual hot areas of the page. Now this can be modules, these can be sub views inside a single page application, individual calls to action, anything. And I can define these areas without having to know JavaScript or a whole lot about exactly how the website is built. Aerialist uses the QA2 API to scan publicly available web pages and present to the user a point and click interface through which they can define hot areas of interest simply by clicking on them and getting suggestions about different ways through which these areas can be identified. And what I just did was I was able to define a homepage slideshow hot area without having to know any JavaScript and without having to leave the launch interface at all. Zipping along, I'm just going to click on some articles further down the page and some calls to action that I know I'm going to want. Now, using the extended options, I'm going to make one definition of article apply only if there are multiple articles on the page, and another one for when there's a single article on the page. I'm also going to select for the social footer that I only wanted to track if there's clickable elements inside that footer. For article intros, I don't want to deduplicate clicks. I want to track all clicks. And the other thing that's worth noting here is the wizard tipped me off that for articles, I can pick out the title dynamically from the heading tag, and it will appear in my reports. And here's another kicker. At any point in the process, I can test all my definitions against a publicly accessible URL in real time, and I will get a breakdown of all the impressions that would have been collected. And I know this is going to be super useful when things start changing on the website. I'm now happy with what I see in the tracking wizard, but I'm going to enable console logging so that I can see it in action on the website. But before I do that, we're going to need some collection rules, and I've configured a whole bunch of them here because there's many ways to go about it, but I'll just show you one. Here I'm collecting impressions at the initial page load or on history change for single page applications. And I'm setting some tracking related evars here, but the actual impressions I'm going to send in a list var so they're not subject to the character limit. and I'm going to ship it all off on an existing Adobe Analytics page level tracking call. And I'm able to do that because Aerialist by default will store and remember all click and impression data for as long as you need it. For clicks, however, I'm going to want to fire an event tracking call every time and then reset the clicks explicitly. Now finally, let's see it all in action. As the carousel rotates, we're picking up impressions. As users scroll or navigate through tabs or load content asynchronously, Aerialist seamlessly detects visibility. And if they interact with an area, those interactions are attributed correctly. Inside Adobe Analytics, I can now build a workspace that measures engagement with a lot more certainty. Even though my site content is highly dynamic, I can glean valuable insight into how each individual content engages or fails to engage users who have actually experienced it. And as an added bonus, I can use the same data to drive a similar custom report inside Google Analytics. So yeah, give it a shot.